Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special podcast series where we'll be diving deep into one of the most complex and often misunderstood topics of our time, the relationship between Islam and Western culture. My name is Izada, and I'll be your guide on this intellectual journey. So, why is this podcast important, and what are we going to discuss? Let's set the stage. First off, let's talk about why we're even having this conversation. The relationship between Islam and the West is a topic that's been fraught with tension, misunderstandings, and unfortunately, stereotypes. It's a subject that impacts millions of lives, influences geopolitics, and shapes cultural narratives. Yet, it's often reduced to sound bites and sensational headlines. That's why we need to have a nuanced, informed discussion, and that's exactly what we aim to do here. So, what's on the agenda? Well, we've got a packed lineup for you. We'll start by delving into the historical context, tracing the relationship between Islam and the West from the Crusades to the modern era. Then, we'll tackle the thorny issue of stereotypes, where they come from, how they affect us, and how we can challenge them. We'll also separate fact from fiction, debunking some of the most common myths about Islam and its relationship with Western culture. And finally, we'll discuss the real-world impact of these narratives, examining how they affect communities and what we can do to foster better understanding. The podcast will be divided into several parts, each focusing on a different aspect of the topic. We'll have in-depth discussions, feature expert interviews, and even take questions from you, our listeners. So, whether you're well-versed in the subject or just curious to learn more, there's something here for everyone. And let's not forget about you, our listeners. We want this to be an interactive experience. Feel free to send in your questions, share your thoughts, and engage with us on social media. After all, the more perspectives we have, the richer the discussion will be. So, are you ready to embark on this enlightening journey? Great. Buckle up, because it's going to be a ride full of insights, revelations, and hopefully, a newfound understanding of a topic that's as relevant as it is misunderstood. Let's get started. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty of modern-day interactions between Islam and the West, let's take a trip down memory lane. The history of these relations spans over 1,000 years and is rife with both conflict and periods of mutual enrichment. So, buckle up, folks, because we're about to embark on a historical journey. When we talk about the relationship between Islam and the West, one of the first events that come to mind is the Crusades. These military expeditions, starting in the late 11th century, aimed to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim rule. But beyond the battlefield, the Crusades led to cultural and scientific exchanges. Western knights encountered advanced medical practices, astronomy, and mathematics that were prevalent in the Islamic world at the time. The Ottoman Empire, which existed from 1299 to 1922, also played a significant role in the history of relations between Islam and the West. On one hand, the Ottomans were military adversaries to many European nations. On the other, they maintained trade and diplomatic relations. Ottoman culture and art influenced European trends, especially in architecture and music. Colonialism marked the next significant chapter in this history. Western powers conquered much of the Muslim world, leading to cultural and political dominance. However, this also led to the spread of Western ideas and technologies in Muslim countries. In the modern era, Islam and the West intersect against a backdrop of globalization, migration, and information exchange. Events like the Cold War, Arab-Israeli conflicts, and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have left their mark. Yet, despite political disagreements, cultural exchange continues in the form of art, music, and literature. As we can see, the history of relations between Islam and the West is complex and multifaceted. It's filled with examples of both conflict and collaboration, And to understand the modern realities, we need to know this history. Alright, folks, now that we've laid down the historical groundwork, let's shift gears and talk about something that affects us all in the here and now: stereotypes. Yeah, those pesky little preconceptions that colour our worldviews. We're going to dissect where these stereotypes come from, how they affect us, and most importantly, how they shape the narrative between Islam and the West. So, let's get into it. First up is the clash of civilizations theory, popularized by Samuel Huntington. This theory suggests that the primary source of conflict in the post-Cold War world would be cultural and religious identities. It's a catchy idea, but is it accurate? Well, not quite. This theory oversimplifies the complex web of social, economic, and political factors that contribute to international relations. It's a reductionist view that doesn't account for the diversity within each civilization. Let's talk about the media, shall we? The media has a powerful role in shaping public opinion, and unfortunately, it often portrays Muslims as the other, reinforcing stereotypes. Whether it's news outlets focusing solely on negative events involving Muslims or Hollywood depicting them as villains, the media plays a significant role in perpetuating stereotypes. And let's not forget social media, where misinformation can spread like wildfire. Ever wonder why stereotypes are so sticky? Well, it's partly because of how our brains are wired. Cognitive shortcuts, known as heuristics, help us quickly process information, but they also make us prone to stereotyping. It's a survival mechanism, but in a modern context, it can lead to harmful prejudices. Understanding these psychological mechanisms can help us become more aware of our biases and work to correct them. One of the most damaging stereotypes is equating Muslims with terrorists. This stereotype has real-world consequences, leading to increased hate crimes, racial profiling, and discrimination. It's a narrative that's been perpetuated post 9/11, but it's essential to remember that extremists represent a tiny fraction of the Muslim population. Most Muslims, like followers of any other faith, are just trying to live peaceful lives. Another pervasive stereotype is about Muslim women being oppressed, often symbolized by the hijab or veil. However, many Muslim women choose to wear the hijab as a form of empowerment and expression of faith. The Western narrative often misses this nuance, painting all Muslim women with a broad brush of oppression. So, there you have it, folks. Stereotypes are not just harmful narratives. They're oversimplifications of complex human experiences. They create divisions and misunderstandings between Islam and the West, and it's high time we challenge these narratives and look beyond the surface. Welcome back, everyone. We've covered a lot of ground so far, from history to stereotypes. Now, let's pivot to something equally important: facts and myths. We're going to sift through the noise and get down to the brass tacks. What's true, what's not, and what lies somewhere in between. So, grab your fact-checker hats, because we're about to dive deep. One of the biggest misconceptions out there is that Islam is a monolithic religion, that all Muslims think and act the same. But here's the deal: Islam is as diverse as any other major world religion. It has various sects, cultural practices, and interpretations. From Indonesia to Nigeria, from Turkey to the United States, Muslims around the world have diverse beliefs and practices. Sharia law, a term that often evokes fear and misunderstanding. But what is it, really? Well, it's not a set of draconian laws as often portrayed in the media. It's a broad set of ethical and moral guidelines that vary in interpretation and application. Some countries implement it more strictly, while others take a more liberal approach. The key takeaway: it's not one size fits all. Sharia law, a term that often evokes fear and misunderstanding. But what is it, really? Well, It's not a set of draconian laws as often portrayed in the media. It's a broad set of ethical and moral guidelines that vary in interpretation and application. Some countries implement it more strictly, while others take a more liberal approach. The key takeaway: it's not one size fits all. Another myth we often hear is that Islam and democracy are inherently incompatible. But that's not the case. Many Muslim-majority countries have democratic systems, and Islamic teachings support principles like justice, equality, and the welfare of the community. The issue is often not the religion itself, but the political and social conditions in specific countries. We touched on this briefly in the last part, but it's worth diving deeper. The role of women in Islam is often misunderstood. Islamic history is full of strong, empowered women, including business leaders, scholars, and warriors. The Prophet Muhammad advocated for many rights for women that were revolutionary at the time. So, the narrative that Muslim women are universally oppressed is not only false but also unfair. So, there you have it. We've busted some myths and shed light on some facts. Understanding the complexities of Islam and its relationship with the West requires us to go beyond the headlines and dig deeper into the issues. And that's exactly what we've done today. Hey folks, welcome back. We've journeyed through history, dissected stereotypes, and debunked myths. Now, let's get real about the impact of these stereotypes. How do they affect Muslim communities? And what ripple effects do they have on society at large? Trust me, this is a conversation you won't want to miss. So, let's dive in. First off, let's talk about the elephant in the room: the impact of stereotypes on Muslim communities. Discrimination, racial profiling, and hate crimes are just the tip of the iceberg. These stereotypes don't just exist in a vacuum. They have real-world consequences. They affect everything from employment opportunities to social integration, creating a cycle of marginalization that's hard to break. One of the most insidious effects of stereotypes is the creation of an us vs them mentality. This divisive thinking fosters a sense of alienation and mistrust, making it difficult for meaningful dialogue and mutual understanding to take place. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. The more we buy into stereotypes, the more divided we become, and the harder it is to see the common humanity that binds us all. Education plays a crucial role in either perpetuating or breaking down stereotypes. Unfortunately, many Western education systems often present a skewed view of Islam and Muslim communities, focusing on negative aspects or historical conflicts. This lack of balanced education contributes to the perpetuation of stereotypes and prejudices. Education plays a crucial role in either perpetuating or breaking down stereotypes. Unfortunately, many Western education systems often present a skewed view of Islam and Muslim communities, focusing on negative aspects or historical conflicts. This lack of balanced education contributes to the perpetuation of stereotypes and prejudices. Let's talk dollars and cents for a moment. Stereotypes don't just have a social cost, they have an economic one too. Discrimination in the workplace, reduced opportunities for business partnerships, and even impacts on tourism can have a tangible economic impact on both Muslim communities and the countries they reside in. Let's talk dollars and cents for a moment. Stereotypes don't just have a social cost, they have an economic one too. Discrimination in the workplace, reduced opportunities for business partnerships, and even impacts on tourism can have a tangible economic impact on both Muslim communities and the countries they reside in. Wow, what a journey we've been on, folks. We've traversed through history, tackled stereotypes, debunked myths, and even delved into the real-world impact of these narratives. As we wrap up this enlightening discussion, Let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned and consider the steps we can take moving forward. So, let's tie up all these loose ends, shall we? Firstly, we've seen that the relationship between Islam and Western culture is far from simple. It's a complex tapestry woven from historical interactions, cultural exchanges, and yes, misunderstandings and stereotypes. We've also learned that many of the preconceptions we might have about Islam and Muslims are often rooted in misinformation or a lack of understanding. Firstly, we've seen that the relationship between Islam and Western culture is far from simple. It's a complex tapestry woven from historical interactions, cultural exchanges, and yes, misunderstandings and stereotypes. We've also learned that many of the preconceptions we might have about Islam and Muslims are often rooted in misinformation or a lack of understanding. Firstly, we've seen that the relationship between Islam and Western culture is far from simple. It's a complex tapestry woven from historical interactions, cultural exchanges, and yes, misunderstandings and stereotypes. We've also learned that many of the preconceptions we might have about Islam and Muslims are often rooted in misinformation or a lack of understanding. And now, for the most important part. What can you do? Well, educate yourself and others. Challenge stereotypes when you see them. Engage in meaningful conversations. Support organizations that are working to foster understanding and break down barriers. And most importantly, be kind. Kindness goes a long way in breaking down walls and building bridges. As we close this chapter, remember that understanding and coexistence are ongoing processes. They require effort, openness, and a willingness to see the humanity in others. Let's carry the lessons we've learned today into our daily lives and strive to create a world where Islam and Western culture not only coexist but enrich each other.